Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Our current session focuses on language, media, and society, the trio. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand the interrelationship of the three. Well, my dear students, language, media, and society, they form a triangle. Language, media, and society, they are in certain ways interconnected with each other. Each affects the other and in return is affected by the other. The question then arises is how far and in what ways each of these affects the other two and is affected by the other two. Well, my dear students, language is a social activity that does not take place in vacuum. It happens in a socio-cultural context. It takes place in, a context that includes a setting as well as the broader sociocultural norms, values, beliefs, and attitudes of people towards language or languages as well. And if we look at today's world, when it comes to the social boundaries are very much blurred. How the users of, when we think of the relationship of language and society, how the users of a particular language would be distinguished from the users of another language. Are they to be determined or differentiated in terms of, their regional status, that people belonging to area A use language X and people belonging to area B use language Y? Or they are to be differentiated in terms of social class, that for example, people of social class A use language A and people of social class B or the lower class, for example, they use language B and thus language C or D respectively by other social class groups like C or D. So, it is very difficult to decide. Then again, there are no clear-cut boundaries that you can draw. A society is not something that you can compartmentalize. You cannot draw clear-cut divisions to say this part of the society is to be named as this and this other part is to be named or titled as this. Because the boundaries are blurred and there are so many things that people of, let's say, one speech community share with the other speech community, or one regional society or one regional community may share with the other region, or people of one social class may share with the other social class. Alongside that, this concept of global village has added to the complication of the situation, because with the changing times, even the national boundaries and the boundaries of states are blurring today, and the concepts of transnational and the concepts of globalization are emerging as very strong concepts. In all this context, the issues of identity when it comes to language and society, they further get complicated, and the relationship does not remain one-to-one, where we can say one language, one society. Multilingualism and bilingualism, they have emerged as norms. One group or people or one society or one nation may use, and most of the times they do use more than one languages. And, in all this context, we cannot say that a simple relationship of one language with one society exists. When we, in this relationship of language and media, we bring in the third angle, that is of media, the situation becomes even more complicated in today's world. When it comes to media and myth in the language change, actually the traditional sociolinguists, people like Peter Trudgill, they have worked on how, media affects language use, and they have talked about the potential impact of societies and particularly on the languages of societies. So, Trudgill, 1986, and then again in his work of 1988, argues that a key process of language change is diffusion. Languages and societies, they are diffusing or spreading of linguistic innovations across the geographical boundaries. The process of change that is occurring in terms of language and in terms of societies, they go parallel. And the change in language that is coming, this diffusion is taking place, all across the globe, and the boundaries are being blurred. One of the ways, according to him, of this diffusion is through the processes of accommodation. Now, accommodation is a technical term that is used in language. And how does the process of accommodation take place? Let me give you a simple example. If two persons are talking, person A and person B, in order to make himself understood to person B, person A would accommodate his language, which means person A would change his or her language choices, vocabulary, linguistic structures, speaking style, pronunciation, etc., in order to accommodate person B, which means to make it understandable for person B. So, most of the times this process of accommodation takes place in face-to-face language interactions. However, the concept is now, it is extended to television or other models of, electronic media as well. And it is very interesting that it fits into those frameworks of the use of television as well. So, Trudgill admits that TV may act as a source for new lexis and new idioms. New lexical items can be introduced and can be spread very speedily because media connects with a lot of people at the same time. This access to masses makes the spread of change in any lexical item or introduction of any new lexis or new idiom possible, in a very short time. Or, as a model for speakers of a dialect to acquire a certain phonology or syntax of the standard variety of language. It can also be used to spread a certain kind of, standardization of a language, a certain kind of phonology or syntax as the standard. People who would watch TV through this medium and how language would be used on television as a medium would be able to understand that this is the standard variety, for example, that is used in news. According to the traditional view, then television may be able to influence systematic language change, but indirectly through changes in attitudes towards linguistic varieties. So, though it is not possible that something that would be shown or would be used on television would change people's language in one day. No, it does not happen so. But, indirectly it changes people's attitudes towards that, their social and their linguistic, both the attitudes. Gradually it becomes more acceptable for them, and thus unconsciously that change occurs. Another view is, with regard to the influence of media on language and society, that it may increase speakers' awareness of innovations. Whatsoever new kind of forms or vocabulary or pronunciation, etc., that would be used, people would become aware of that through media. However, it is very less likely to promote their adoption. According to this view, when it comes to adopting them, the role of media is comparatively lesser and people would not simply directly adopt them. An example of that is the dialect speakers of English. So, they would see the standard English variety, but it is not necessary that they would adopt that, that standard variety. So this is considered to be a misleading concept that by some sociolinguists that media would completely change people's use of language. There are certain, doubts about that. German sociolinguists, for example, Branded 1984 asserts the broadcast media affect their audience, including their language, but it is difficult to quantify this change or to even qualify this change. This influence that media has, there is no denying the fact. However, to measure that is difficult because in this relationship of language, society, and media, who affects how much is a very tricky question. Muhr 2003 makes strong claims for the exposure to German television as a key factor in current lexical, grammatical changes that are underway in Austrian German. So, however, there are certain researches that focus on how still media has its influences, though they are not easy to measure. So, the role of social media apart from electronic media such as radio and television is also to be considered. In the recent years, the use of, interactive social media or new media or social media, as different terms are used, it has brought people from different cultures, people from different societies in close collaboration. And thus, it has also had a strong influence on how people use, language in different societies. So, when we look at the processes of communication that take place in a society, we can say that communication is a two-way process. And in the case of, the existence of media and language in a society, the two-way process carries on, and, both language and media thus influence each other.